I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. On October 23rd, 1971, Deputy Sheriff James T. Hall was shot and killed in the parking lot of the Manor Country Club. I often walk my dog through that same parking lot. This was close to home. And by home, I mean Montgomery County, Maryland. In 1971, Manor Country Club was an expensive golf course community, large homes perched around manicured greens with tall oak trees. It still is. The development was marked off on one side by Georgia Avenue, across which sits Leisure World, one of the largest retirement communities on the East Coast outside of Florida. And on the other side by Norbeck Road, across which is the Flower Valley neighborhood, which was yet to be built. But across from Belpre Road, the third side of what is roughly a triangle, new homes had been built recently, starting 1965, in developments with names like Manor Woods, English Manor, Aspen Knolls, which had Rockville addresses but were really part of Aspen Hill in unincorporated Montgomery County. The homes were modest, split-level, cheap construction and sold to plumbers, electricians, and school teachers. Parts of the area fed to Rockville High School, others to Perry High School, which was closed in the 1980s, and the southernmost section went to Wheaton High School. On Aspen Hill Road was an old pet cemetery, closed now but still there, and Maggie's Place, a church-led teen center and homeless shelter that was destroyed later in a fire. The juxtaposition of a rich and a working-class neighborhood created tensions, and one of them was over teenage boys, many of whom lived in the new homes across Belpre Road, breaking into soda machines for coins at the Manor Country Club. Deputy Hall's murder became a cold case. His daughter, Carolyn, however, persisted 50 years to finally get Montgomery County Police Department to reopen the case in 2021. She had moved out of Maryland to live in Dallas Metro in Texas in the 1980s, but had kept up long-distance pressure. In 2015, the Montgomery County Police Department solved another infamous cold case, that of the murder of the Lyons sister in 1975. They used new genetic and ancestry tracing technology. At the receiving end of Carolyn's calls and emails, one of the detectives on the cold case unit finally decided to take another look at the Hall murder. Carolyn also told the story to her gastroenterologist in Dallas, Michael Weisberg, who it turns out was a moonlighting crime writer. As the cold case team pursued old leads, Michael Weisberg decided to write a book, which is now out. Michael Weisberg joins me to tell the full story. Stay with us.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by UMBC's Political Science Program, where you'll learn to shape public policy, impact communities, and function at the center of modern society. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
I got all the rest of my life to figure out what I didn't get right. I got all the rest of my days to figure out how I let you slip away.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning, precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. We celebrate new music for the summer, and this is Silver Spring's own power pop band, the Airport 77s, Andy Sullivan on guitar, John Kelly on drums, and Cal Everett, famously of the band 4 out of 5 Doctors, on the bass. The songs we play come from their brand new album, Don't Let Go. You can find the Airport 77s at airport77s.com and at live concerts all over the DC region.
Sing along with the pop pop radio, baby, one more time. Take me back before it all fell apart, before you broke my heart. Take me back to 1999. We thought it would last forever. The 31st of December, singing along with the pop pop pop. Parties over whoops at a time. Take me back before it all came unglued. Back when I had you. Take me back to
Michael Weisberg, welcome to I Hit Politics.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
On October 23rd, 1971, in Montgomery County, Maryland, Deputy Sheriff James T. Hall, known as JT, was shot in the parking lot of Manor Country Club. You just published a book called A Second Shot on what turned out to be a 50-year-old cold case by what happened that October night in 1971.
On October 23rd, 1971, on a Saturday night, James T. Hall was a deputy sheriff. He was at home with his family. His grandchildren usually slept over with he and his wife on Saturday nights, and they were planning on doing that so that his daughter and son-in-law could go out on a date. He was called at 6:30 that night by Deputy Sheriff Johnson, who was actually supposed to be manning the patrol at the Manor Country Club that night. They hired the deputy sheriffs as off-duty security guards. And Deputy Johnson, at 6:30, he called James T. Hall and said that he had family issues and couldn't make it to the country club, and would James T. Hall cover for him. Hall said yes after consulting with his wife. It was a dark, rainy night in October, miserable night, terrible rainstorm. He drove to the country club, leaving his wife to take care of the 2 grandchildren. He was there and got there. His shift was supposed to be from 7 to 1, so a 6-hour shift. He alternated between being in his car and sitting there and watching the parking lot where he was parked. And from there, he had a vantage point of the clubhouse at the Manor Country Club, as well as of the golf course. He could see both easily. He would smoke his pipe, which was one of his enjoyments while he was in the car, but he also would get out and go patrol around, look at the golf course, look in the parking lot, look for any cars that something seemed funny. The reason he had been hired and that they had been hired in the first place is that there had been a series of break-ins and different things that had been done in the area, criminal acts that was thought to have been done by teenage boys. The Manor Country Club felt that they needed some security, so that's why they'd hired him. So he was on the lookout for making sure no one was trying to break into the Coke machines, which had happened before on the outside of the country club, or to any of the cars, or vandalize the cars, or vandalize the country club. He went inside several times on a Saturday night. It was busy, and talked to the people. He was dripping wet because it was raining so hard. He got back to his car, and at about 10:30 p.m., he was sitting in the car getting ready to take out his pipe again when something got his attention off to the right of the parking lot. He got out of his car and had a flashlight because it was such a dark night. He felt to where his gun was, and he went to where he saw on the area on the golf course, there was a pile that had been made of various household items. It included things like a step stool and a jack-o'-lantern, furniture, household things that would be used to make beds, sheets, things like that. He then saw people that were around, we think, and he said to them, "Hey, what are you doing?" He flashed his flashlight at them. A shot rang out, hit the flashlight, and knocked it 10 feet from him. He turned around to get out of the way, and as he turned around, a second shot rang out, and that shot was the kill shot. It hit him in the back of the head, low in the back of the head, and traveled up to where it landed just below his right eyebrow. He fell to the ground. He was found a little bit later, initially by a couple that were on a date, and they started walking across the country club parking lot, and they saw something lying there. And then by five boys, teenage boys, who it turns out had been vandalizing the Coke machines that night and had not been able to get in to get anything out of the Coke machines, but they had been vandalizing the Coke machines, and they had heard sirens earlier in the night, and probably had, because of those sirens, they'd gotten into their car, drove away for a little while. But then when they realized that those sirens were fire trucks, they'd come back to the country club, and they too found what they described as, they thought it was a big heap of trash lying in the middle of the parking lot as they were driving in, and it turned out to be the sheriff. Both the couple and the boys went in, and they called the police, and they called for an ambulance, and they came and they took J.T. Hall to the hospital. He was wearing a yellow raincoat at the time he was shot. They found later on his flashlight, which was about 10 to 15 feet away from him. His pipe had skittered across the parking lot and ended downhill near a drainage area. And the gun was laying right next to him, right under him, so that when he moved the body, they found his unfired gun.
So at this point, I think it's important to note that J.T. Hall was in the sheriff's office in Montgomery County, Maryland. The sheriff's office is different from the county police department, which runs all the investigations. The sheriff's department is a support function for our courts in Montgomery County. Now, Deputy Hall did not die immediately that day. What was his state, and when did he finally pass away?
He was taken to Montgomery County Hospital, and his daughter and son-in-law were called at about 11 p.m. They went and picked up his wife, and the son-in-law's parents went and took the children. And they went to the hospital. He was in the emergency room, and they called a neurosurgeon. The hospital emergency room doctor had called a neurosurgeon, as well as intubating him, putting him on a breathing machine because he was no longer capable of breathing on his own. The neurosurgeon came in dressed in a tuxedo, examined him, looked at the x-rays that had been done, and pulled Bob Philo, who was his son-in-law and who was a canine officer at that time. He said, "There's nothing we can do for the deputy sheriff. He's got no brain activity, and he can be on the ventilator, but there's nothing to be done to help him. There's no brain that's left." They kept him in the hospital for 3 days alive. All the family came in. He had two nephews who were also law enforcement. His brother was the fire chief of Montgomery County. And so everybody gathered and came in. And then finally they said their goodbyes. And on the 26th, 3 days later, they took him off the ventilator. And within 30 minutes, he had his last breath.
You spoke with Detective O.W. Sweat, who was the first officer assigned to the case. What did Detective Sweat do? What did he find?
Talked to Detective Sweat, and don't forget this was 52 years later, and he was in his 80s. But O.W. Sweat said that he came there that night, and then he put his attention on the boy who was driving the car for the boys that were trying to break into the Coke machines. This young man, whose last name was Shoemaker, had a father who was on the police departments at Montgomery County. And he was known for getting into mischief and for having criminal activity. And actually, for the next 50 years, this young man bore the brunt, and then he became an adult, of course. And by the time I saw him, he was 70. He bore the brunt, and he had the hatred of the police department because policemen would come up to him or his father and say, "We know that your son did it. He's been involved in all these other criminal things, and we're certain that your son did it." He centered on this one person and never gave a thought to there being a possibility of other people, so that he took care of the case for several years. He was the lead detective on the case. He told me he interviewed between 75 and 100 people, interviewed people that lived in the area. Of course, he interviewed several times the Coke machine boys. But because those boys were juveniles, their parents had to give permission for them to be interviewed. And Shoemaker's father, as a policeman, would not let him be interviewed. And that was another reason why O.W. Sweat and the other policemen on the police force thought that he was the culprit.
So a juvenile suspect could not be interviewed by the police at that time?
Unless they were caught in the act of actually doing the crime. Maryland protects the juveniles, and they do not let them, without the parents giving permission, unless they're caught in the act of doing something, they can refuse to be interviewed. I will say this, that the other boys that were in the car that were breaking into the Coke machine all alibied each other and alibied him. Carolyn Philo, who was J.T. Hall's daughter, and her son-in-law, Bob, they did talk to him. At the trial, after he testified, they followed him out of the courtroom and apologized to him on behalf of everyone for what he had gone through.
Soon this becomes a cold case. What were people saying about why and who had killed Deputy Hall?
As I mentioned, the police department was focused in on Norman Shoemaker, but there were other theories. There was the theory that it was a mafia hit. And one of the family members of the Hall Philo family had been told that theory, and that person could not believe that it was still an ongoing cold case. The theory was that there was a hit done, and that it was possibly for the officer who was the deputy sheriff who was supposed to be working that night, Johnson, that someone had come and killed him. And then they were told that because the Philo Hall family had someone in their family who was in the mafia, and that was not allowed to kill the family member of a mafia-made man, that the person who did the murder that night had been murdered themselves and found under a bridge within the next few years. There was also a theory that as I mentioned, there'd been a lot of break-ins and a lot of mischief and a lot of different acts that had been done in this area around the Manor Country Club at that time in the 70s. And there was a theory that one of the young people, men that lived in that area, had killed the deputy sheriff, and that person's father or parents were so wealthy and were so powerful that they blocked any meaningful investigation.
And the case remained cold for a long, long time.
The deputy sheriff's daughter never gave up hope. Carolyn Philo would call the police on a regular basis and ask them to reopen the case, ask them to look if there's any new evidence. For 50 years, she was 28 when he was murdered, and when it was reopened in 2021 for the 50th anniversary, she was 78.
What were the circumstances of the reopening of the case?
I think that Montgomery Police Department was encouraged by the fact that on the 40th anniversary of the Lyon sisters' abduction, rape, murder, and burning, two young girls who at ages of 10 and 12 in broad daylight were abducted from the Wheaton Plaza Mall. And they were taken away, and they were able to find out who did it. And then through incredible interrogation by the cold case detectives, they were able to figure out who had done it and bring closure to the family, even though they never found any trace of the girls ever again. So that when it was the 50th anniversary of J.T. Hall's murder, they decided, this lady, Carolyn Philo, has been calling us, and if we don't do something now, if there is anybody that's available, they're going to be dead soon. We better reopen it now. And the officer who did it, the cold case detective who did it, had been involved in starting the Lyon sister case. Chris Homrock is his name. He was the one that pushed to open it again. And he put together a team of 3 female detectives. Katie Leggett, who played a very prominent role in the Lyon sister case. They had a lady named Lisa Killen, who was on the plainclothes. She had decided that she wanted to see what it was like to do cold case work. And finally, they took someone from the homicide department, Sarah White, and she was the third person.
How did the cold case team proceed?
So you're given a big box, and in that box is all the evidence and everything that's written and all the testimonies and every witness that's been interviewed, et cetera. And so Lisa Killen took that box and went through it step by step. She found a reel-to-reel tape. That in the 70s was a way to interview people. It's like a tape recorder. She took the tape to the police department. They couldn't do anything. She took it to a private person. They couldn't. She finally took it to the FBI. They were able to change it to a tape that they could listen to. And it turned out that it was an interrogation from 1973, about 18 months after the murder. And the interrogation was done by 3 police officers, along with a prison inmate named Larry Becker. Larry Becker had been arrested in the year before, 1972, and charged with the burglary of a townhome. And he had escaped from prison. So in addition to the time he was supposed to serve for the robbery, he was given additional time for the escape from prison. So Larry said to the police, I know about the murder of the deputy sheriff, and in exchange for leniency and reduction of my sentence, I'm willing to tell you about it. And this tape was his interrogation with these 3 police officers about what happened that night at the Manor Country Club when the deputy sheriff was murdered.
Was O.W. Sweat still the officer in charge of the case?
Yes. It was 2 days. The first day was Larry Becker talking to the detectives and giving his testimony over several hours. He made himself an eyewitness of the murder and told what exactly went down and who did it. The second day was taking him out to the site, Manor Country Club, where he showed everything that had happened and where it had happened. O.W. Sweat was present at that time, not for the initial interrogation, but when he went out there.
And so that's how the interrogation tape ended up in the case box.
Yes, it ended up in the case box, but it was mislabeled and it had been overlooked. When police have a murder case like this, they try to hold back some of the evidence. It's called their holdback, so that when they interview possible suspects, they can see if they know and can fill in the gaps and know this evidence, there's a good chance that they were involved in the crime. One of the main pieces of the holdback was that there were 2 shots fired. No one knew that. Wasn't in any of the newspaper articles, anything like that, that told what had happened. But when Larry Becker talked to the police officers, one of the things he said was that there were 2 shots. And so that was immediately got Lisa's attention.
Got Lisa's attention, but not O.W. Sweat's.
No. He said that from the testimony, he was convinced that Larry Becker did not have eyes on this murder and he was not a suspect.
Right. And he was only doing it because he wanted a lesser sentence.
Exactly. And the fact that he'd gotten some of the things right, the things that he'd gotten right, they apparently were willing to just let slide and didn't feel that they were as important as the things that he'd gotten wrong. The things that he said that did not go along with what happened that night was he said it was a beautiful night, clear, no rain, and it was a stormy, rainy night, that the deputy sheriff was wearing a uniform, not wearing a yellow raincoat, which he was, and the area where he said, and when they took him out to the country club to show them the next day, the area that he said where the shooting had occurred and where the body of Deputy Sheriff Hall was found was completely wrong. So he had a couple of the details right. He named himself as being there, but he also, the people that he said, the man that he said, young man he said murdered the deputy sheriff was actually not there that night at all. And the person that he said he'd been with right before he went to the Manor Country Club to witness this shooting was actually in the Navy at that time.
And when Lisa Cullen and her team find this tape and listen to it and get all this information, what strikes them?
They come at it from a totally different perspective. They're new to the case. There's no evidence, no DNA evidence that's available, probably because everything got washed away. It was raining so hard that night. There's no eyewitnesses, no physical evidence. So I think that what they basically saw was, here's someone who's admitting to being an eyewitness. 18 months later, he's got some things right. We at least need to talk to this man and find out what he knows, not only at the country club that night where the Coke machine's being broken into by 5 teenage boys, but someone was committing a robbery. The home right across the golf course from the country club was owned by, or is still owned by Roger and Diane Schmidt. They were away that day for an outing in the mountains. While they were away, their house was being broken into, and things were being brought across the golf course and stacked up right on the parking lot where the country club was. So you had these two things going on, two criminal activities going on at the same time. One, we know the 5 boys who did it. The others, we don't know who was doing the robbery, or at least I won't tell you at this point who was doing the robbery. But these two things were going on. Lisa Killen felt that she needed to figure out a way to see if this gentleman could bring together the robbery, the murder, and if that was what had happened.
But even though they tied those two incidents together, they didn't follow up with the Larry Becker interview afterward.
No, they did not fire. He didn't talk at all about the robbery.
Okay.
Anything about that. He didn't say anything at all about that. He just talked about 9 boys being in the Coke machines, trying to break into them, being around the Coke machines, and then a deputy sheriff coming up on a nice night. It was easy to see, and saying to them, "What are you doing?" One of the boys crouching down in a shooter's position, shooting him, and then shooting him a second time and killing him. And then Larry said he took off and ran. He ended up back at a place called Maggie's, which was the Church of Mary Magdalene. That at that time was a popular hangout for teenagers. And they even let homeless teenagers stay there. Larry Becker had been thrown out of his house by his adopted father at the age of 14 and had been living on the streets. He slept most nights either at Maggie's place on a bench there, or in the pet cemetery, which was located next to the Church of Mary Magdalene. Ran all the way to the church.
That's almost 2 miles.
He was a tremendous runner when he was younger. Later on, within an hour, the person that he named as the shooter came in to there, and he claimed that the police the next day had arrested that shooter, which was not completely false. That had never happened. And they asked him later on, when Lisa later on went to see him as the suspect 50 years later, why didn't you go up and say something to him that you'd seen him shoot this deputy sheriff? And he said, well, there were other people that this guy knew, and if he said that, then he would know that he was the one that had told on him, and he was afraid of retribution from these other people.
Now, Lisa Cullen and her team did not find Larry Becker so easily.
Larry Becker, in 1980, when he got out of jail, said, "I'm never returning to Maryland." He had been born and raised in Little Falls, New York, which is the second smallest city in New York, less than 5,000 population. He had an alcoholic mother and an absent father who only returned often enough to impregnate the mother so that there were 4 children. Larry was the second oldest. At the age of 7, his 3 siblings, an older sister and 2 brothers, were living in foster homes mainly, and they were adopted by the Becker family. Now, the Beckers only wanted the sister. They had just adopted a baby boy, and they wanted a girl to go have his family. But the alcoholic natural mother, whose last name was Smith, said, "No, if you're going to adopt one of my children, they come as a package, all 4." So all 4 children were adopted, and they eventually ended up down in Montgomery County, Maryland, in the Manor Country Club area where the shooting took place. One of the brothers was named Leslie Becker, and since Lisa and Katie couldn't find any evidence of any Larry Becker, they decided to look for Leslie Becker. And they were able to find an obituary for Leslie Becker. And in the obituary, it said he was survived by a brother, Larry Smith. And they figured out that his original name was Smith. He'd been adopted by the Beckers and his name changed. But he had left Maryland, moved back to Little Falls, New York, under the name of Larry Smith. And while there, the next 41 years until Lisa Katie went to find him. He'd lived a quiet life there, married. He had 3 children. He'd become a member of society. He had jobs. He was a security guard, which was the job he liked the most. He was also a nurse's aide. He worked in factories, and he raised 3 children. He and his wife were separated. He said he'd never pay for a divorce. And by the time it was 2021 and Lisa was looking for him, he was living in a high rise for people over the age of 50 and had a small apartment there.
But it wasn't easy just to go get him to talk. So they went through one of the guys in the group that he used to run with.
They went to the guy, John Rizzo, who he had named as, when he confessed to the police, he said that he had been with Rizzo and then left Rizzo and gone to the Manor Country Club and seen the murder. They made a series of calls, what are called controlled calls. They had Rizzo do it. Controlled calls where you have someone call a suspect, and while it's being done, the police monitor the entire call. But when they had Rizzo call him and say, hey, you named me as being involved in this and an eyewitness to this murder, the police have a tape from 1973 that you gave, and you named me, and I'm in it, and now the police are coming after me. Larry originally denied even knowing him. He denied even going to that high school, even though it said in his Facebook page that he'd gone to the same high school, Robert Perry High School, that they'd all gone to. So they took the call, and he basically said, don't ever call me again, and he hung up. Well, in the next couple of days, Larry had tried to call Rizzo a couple of times, and he didn't answer because the police wanted to make a second control call to him. And in the second control call, he did admit that his name had been Larry Becker, and he'd hung out with these other common friends. One was named Raven, one was named Mark Jensen. And so he kind of placed himself as being the person who had been grown up in that area and who had made that statement to the police in 1973 that he was the eyewitness for the murder.
And then the cold case team went to New York to interview Larry Smith Becker.
Herkimer County in New York, which is where Little Falls is located and also where Utica, New York is located. And they didn't feel like they should talk to any of the local police in case they had any connection with the family. So what they did was they went to the state police and they got them to go with them to this high-rise building where Larry was living. They looked around for a place. They were led into the building and looked around for a place to interview him that was quiet, but they couldn't find any place. Everything they looked at wasn't good. So they went up to his room on the 8th floor and they introduced themselves. And he wasn't that surprised that they were there because he kind of said, I knew you'd be coming, because Rizzo had told him that they were after him. And unless he gave him an alibi and said that he hadn't been there, that he was going to tell them all about Larry and where he was, that he had found him and where he was. So he wasn't that surprised to see them. And he agreed to come with them to be interviewed at the police barracks for Herkimer County. The interview is really what the whole case hinges on. During those 3 hours and 45 minutes, and it came out that finally Larry admitted to being there and being an eyewitness. And then he admitted to being part of the burglary. And then he admitted to having one of the other burglars had shot him. Larry is 5 feet 3 inches tall. The person that he said shot him was 6 feet tall. The sheriff was 5'10". The trajectory of the bullet had to be from the way it was shot was from someone that was down lower. And it wasn't from someone who was 6 foot tall because it entered in the lower part of his skull and went up to behind his right eye. So when he was told the trajectory and he knew what trajectory was, and after more talking and more back and forth, he admitted that he had accidentally shot the deputy sheriff and that he didn't know he'd killed him. He asked, am I going to be put in jail today? And they said no. He was driven back to his apartment by another police officer and Killen and Leggett filled out all the paperwork, got back down to Maryland, and then they contacted the police department in Herkimer County, and 5 hours later, he was brought in and arrested.
So once he was extradited to Maryland, he went to trial in the local court. What happened?
He initially had waived his extradition, so he was transferred without a fight to Maryland. But once he got there, he changed his mind. And he decided that he was not guilty, and he wanted to plead not guilty and withdraw his confession. When he did that, the public defender's office in Montgomery County felt that it was too complicated a case, covering over 50 years of evidence and testimony. And often in these cases, they'll get major law firms from Washington, D.C., which is about a 30-minute ride on Metro away. So it's a good place. It's easy for them to get to. And it's a good way for these big law firms to get their junior associates practice in a trial.
What happens at the trial then?
Now, one of the most important things of the case initially were his Miranda rights violated by them taking him there and not telling him you have the right to remain silent, you have the right to an attorney. And that was something that was in the court before the case went to trial. And it was determined by the judge that he was always free to go. He was never truly in custody, so that there was no reason that they had to read his Miranda rights to him. And so they hadn't violated anything so that the charges couldn't be thrown out. During those 3 hours and 45 minutes, he also took 2 breaks to go outside. And he was a smoker, a heavy smoker, smoked up to 3 packs of cigarettes a day. And he'd actually gone across the street from the barracks, completely left the facility by himself. So he was free to go. He could have thumbed a ride. He could have walked wherever he wanted to, called a cab, whatever he wanted to do. So the judge determined that he was free to go.
And that first trial, what happened? Because there was a retrial, right?
The first trial, they had several counts he was tried for. He was tried for first-degree murder, which to be first-degree murder means there has to be intent, that the person had thought about it and planned it. The prosecution said that the thinking and planning was when he had fired the second shot, that between firing the first shot, knocking out the flashlight, and the second shot, the kill shot, that he had to deliberate and think that, I do want to kill this person. And the jury found him not guilty of that charge. But the other thing they tried him for was felony murder, first degree and second degree felony murder. And that's the commission of murder while you're doing another act that's a felony, such as breaking in or robbing a place. And they felt that the breaking and entering of the Schmidt's home was the felony, and that's then the murder. And on both of those charges ended up being a hung juror.
And the trial then goes for a second round.
The prosecution said, this is definitely going to be retried.
What happened?
We'll go by the book.
Now, Carolyn Philo by this time is 81 years.
Yes.
Can you describe what she feels?
I'm still her doctor, and I recently saw them, and she's doing well.
Michael Weisberg, thank you for telling the story of Deputy James Hall and his family, his murder, and the cold case that ran 50-some years. That was Dallas, Texas gastroenterologist Michael Weisberg, who is a moonlighting crime writer. Weisberg's patient, Carolyn Philo, told him about the murder of her father, Montgomery County, Maryland Deputy Sheriff James T. Hall, in 1971. The case went cold for 50 years, but now has been solved. Weisberg wrote and published a book on the case called A Second Shot, which is now available on Amazon. I will add a link in the show notes. That's all for this episode of I Hate Politics, where we aim to stem the decline in local news by working with community voices. Don't forget to tune in to our Tuesday morning news analysis. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities at Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from Silver Spring power pop band The Airport 77s. Andy Sullivan on guitar, John Kelly on drums, and Cal Everett on the bass. The songs for this episode come from their brand new album, Don't Let Go. You can find their music at airport77s.com and at live concerts all over the region. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihbpod.org. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.
Do you like ice cream? Depends on the time of year. Take it or leave it in February, but summer's almost here. I got a buddy down at Baskin Robbins, maybe he can hook us up. 31 flavors, Rainbow Jimmy's, need a bucket loader, let's hop a city bus, see where it takes us. Wind up in some neighborhood where we've never been before. Maybe we can make new friends, maybe we'll just get lost. Ask our fellow strap hangers where they think we should get off. 'Cause I'm in if it's on, if it's on.